Thank you all for coming here tonight, and thank you, Beth, for that wonderful introduction. And I really do feel honored and privileged to know Lizzy, my great, great, great grandmother, even though I didn't ever really actually meet her. I'm not quite that old. I could tell you lots about Lizzy, but I think it's much more interesting for you to hear it from Lizzy herself. I was born Elizabeth Darby in Worcestershire County, England in 1842. I didn't get a proper schooling, but even though I'm not quite 5 feet tall, and just a bit of a thing as they say, I took up blacksmithing. And right good I was at it too. See this dust cap? I've been wearing one since I took up smithing. Flying sparks can eat a head of air right quick. Also, just between us, the cap hides the thinning in the air. Smithing might not be lighty-like, but it kept me and my baby girl Thursday Ann out of the poorhouse after that bloody no-good Frank Wilkes left us. Said he were coming back, but when he didn't, after about 3 years, I took him for dead and married Bill Imbling. Bill was a good enough man, but what really held us together is we both dreamed of coming to America, and we would work and save to make it happen. We were setting our plan to sail, and who should we run into but Frank Wilkes? Well, as you probably got an idea, I weren't too set on traditional ways, but duty was duty. So I told Frank I would leave Bill and stay with him. To me great relief, he says, "Stay with Imbling. He's a better man than I am." Maybe Frank weren't all rotten after all. So in June of '69, me, Bill, our 18-month-old son Adam, and 6-year-old Thursday Ann sailed from Liverpool to America. We could have stayed out east, but Bill liked what he was hearing about prospects of gold and silver out west. It took about 5 years for us to make it to western Colorado, where rich lodes were being discovered in the La Plata Range. We were even in Chicago long enough for Bill to become a citizen of this still new country. In 1875, we come to the Animas Valley. And in 1877, Bill stepped off and filed a homestead on the Animas River, near where Hermosa Creek comes into it. Bill saw the land as mostly mineral in nature and spent most of his time prospecting, which kept him away from home most of the time. But I saw it as fine pasture land, and I weren't shy of the hard work it would take to get a dairy going in that growing community. Now, I ain't saying Bill was lazy, but he weren't too fond of hard work neither. So I set up me forge and plied me trade, shoeing horses and making and mending tools for other settlers. I used every extra penny to buy milk cows. It weren't easy with Bill being gone most of the time, but I had a young neighbor, Henry Knight, who lent us a hand and saw us through. Now, Henry, there was a prize. He'd come from Virginia in '74 and lived with his older brother. He was a hard worker. He could read and write and had him some manners. He weren't bad to look at neither, with them blue eyes, fair hair, and wide shoulders. He took Adam under his wing. They fished and hunted, and Henry taught him to read and write. Adam was proud of being able to read and write. He tried to get Thursday to study with Adam, but Thursday's interest was in livestock. I could rely on her to tend the livestock, but as soon as her chores were done, she was off on her half-wild Indian pony with her skirts and dark curls a-flying. Thursy was a damn good rider, but it was clear Henry worried about her safety. Now, I had my eye on Henry for a husband for Thursy from the beginning. And when nature made her a woman, I put it to Henry. Even though Henry was 10 years older than Thursy, he liked the notion. A little more than a month after Thursy turned 14, they got married. They moved downriver to Animas City, where his skill in woodworking was in demand. Thursy enjoyed the social doings of the community and made friends with the other women. Ollie Nash became her close friend and taught her to ride side saddle and other womanly manners I never had no care to learn. A little more than a year later, she was expectant and looking forward to becoming a mother. Edith May was born on February 15th, 1879. Later that spring, ore samples from Carbondale Camp, later named Rico, came in rich in silver. Bill joined the rush to the new diggings, and Henry went with him. But Henry's mules were packed with tools and supplies for farming, not mining. Henry had heard about grass for the taking in the unclaimed Disappointment Valley, and he wanted to explore it as a possible place to settle and farm. He found land to his liking about 7 miles west of the valley's first homestead, that of Wilkes and Mary Ann Nash. However, for company and safety, he built his cabin close to the Nash cabin. He was the second settler in Disappointment Valley. Now, that valley weren't named by any of the settlers. The way it were told, before any settlers come to the valley, a party of surveyors come down off the dry hills at the lower end of it, in the west end, late in the summer, and they were out of water. They saw a line of trees marking the creek bed and reckoned it started up in the mountains they could see off to the east. And they thought that they'd get down there and there'd be water. Well, when they got there, it was dry. If those surveyors had come in the upper east end of the valley, like the settlers had, they wouldn't have named it that. But the settlers reckoned it kept the weak-willed and timid out, and that was okay with them. When I was sure the silver strike was genuine, Adam and I drove me milk cows to the Boomin camp and found a sure market for fresh milk and butter. Thursy came with us, carrying Edith on horseback. Thursy and I are recorded as the first female residents of Rico. Bill was living in a tent on his claim and had no time or interest in helping build a house for us or a barn for the milking. His claim, by the way, turned out to be Lot 22 in Block 2 of Rico when Rico got platted. I chose a place on Piedmont Flat for me house and the road to Orse Gulch for me barn. Good, reliable Henry joined us and helped to build the house and barn. The mining and dairy businesses were both booming, and Thursy and I weren't long the only females living in Rico. By October, with winter setting in, it was time to get me cows out of Rico before there was nothing above the snow for 'em to eat. Henry planned to take 'em to Disappointment, where there was plenty of winter pasture. He had also planned to take Thursy and Edith to their new home. But recent attacks by Ute warriors on the cavalry and the White River Indian Agency made him decide to wait until it was safer. So he decided that Thursy and Edith would return to Hermosa with Adam and me. Well, that's when Thursy's stubborn orneriness and discontent showed up. She had been working as a cook in a boarding house, and she refused to leave Rico. No amount of talking could change her mind, so we took Edith back to our homestead on the Animas. I hoped that being away from her baby would convince her to come later, but it didn't. Henry spent the winter with the cows in the Disappointment Valley. As soon as the trails were passable in the spring, Henry trailed me cows and new calves, a result of wintering with the Nash herd, back to Rico. And I was there to see him come in and see my own brand, the Hey-He, on them cows. Those healthy calves were proof to me of the promise of Henry's Disappointment country. With these mixed calves, I now had me a start in the beef cattle business. I was happy to see Henry, but I can't say the same for Thursy Ann. She'd taken a room at the boarding house where she worked and refused to let Henry share it. Poor Henry had to sleep elsewhere, and he weren't a bit happy about it neither. Bill and I were also living apart. I had moved back into me house on Piedmont Flat with Adam, now 12, and little Edith. Bill had replaced the tent on his claim with a shack and found him a tart to share it. With the return of me cows, the dairy was back in operation, so I again made me own living. The government started putting the Utes on reservations, and Henry now thought it safe enough to take Thursday and Edith to his homestead. But Thursday said she wouldn't leave Rico. I advised him to kick her arse over the mountain, but he weren't that kind of man. He tried gentle persuasion, but Thursday wouldn't budge. Henry suspected another man, so before he returned to his land, he told her that if she didn't decide to join him in disappointment before the end of the summer, she would not remain his wife nor raise Edith. After passing her 17th birthday on July 3rd, Thursday Ann made her decision and filed for divorce. She and Henry were divorced in September of 1880. The decree didn't mention Edith, so she continued to live with me. Maybe I'm partly to blame for the outcome of that marriage. Thursday never had a chance to taste independence until that winter in Rico, and who can blame her for liking it? But I was so afraid Henry might get away that I pushed her into getting married when she weren't much more than a child. By the time she was 16, she was a mother. And maybe Henry did seem like an old man to her, and God knows there were a lot of young blokes around Rico to pay her attention. Don't get me wrong, I think she were a fool to leave Henry and Edith, but she didn't get a chance to do no sparking before I married her off to Henry. Well, what was done, and I had me darling Edith to care for, and as good as no husband to help out. Adam was spending most of his time with his pa working on the claim and staying with him a good bit of the time. That winter, Henry again took me cows back to Disappointment, and I returned to Hermosa with Edith. In the spring, Henry trailed me cows back to Rico with a new crop of calves with a Hay-He brand, and the dairy was again in operation. Now, the lack of support from Bill and his keeping another woman right under my nose had gone far enough, and I filed charges against him. He come back by filing for divorce. I had no thought to stop the divorce, so I didn't show up in court, and the divorce was granted on September 8, 1881. Now, Bill got custody of Adam, but as I said, he was working with his pa most of the time, and anyhow, I knew Adam wouldn't stay away from me for too long. As you can probably tell, I always had a soft spot for Henry, and well, he for me, I suspect. 20 days after my divorce from Bill, Henry and I got the 4th marriage license in Dolores County. And that's how I became Lizzy Knight. Now, it's not too often a woman ends up married to her son-in-law. And our descendants will claim that we did it to provide a home for Edith. But I'd been known to sing a little ditty about a night with me knight, which let him know that Mary and Henry was more than that. Yes, I did shave a couple years off me age on the marriage license. But most people thought I was younger than me 37 years anyway. And yes, I was 11 years older than Henry, but it didn't bother him and it didn't bother me. Henry built a new log cabin on his homestead, and we became one of the first families in Disappointment Valley. That cabin still stands, and someday may give people a peek at the life of the beginning days of cattle ranching in them parts. We worked hard and we prospered. My small herd grew into a fine beef herd as my cows mixed with the bulls on the open range. Henry built ditches and diverted water from Disappointment Creek onto our land. He got the first water right from the creek. We had fine crops, a garden, and fruit trees, all protected from the grazing cattle by the first fences in the valley. I didn't keep in the dairy business nor do much smithing, but I was always looking to see what was needed to make extra money. So I got things the settlers and cow-hands often needed, but didn't want to ride to Norwood, Telluride, Rico, or Dolores to get, and started a small store. I stocked such things as tobacco, rolling papers, cartridges, lard, flour, and overalls. I operated the store out of our cabin. As time went on, I saved a tobacco can full of gold coins. I hid the can somewhere even Henry didn't know. Our cabin was a busy place, with the store and Henry helping folks buy, sell, and trade livestock. We decided we needed more room, so Henry built a 2-story frame house a few yards from the cabin. The front parlor became my store, and later the Lavender Post Office as well. On August 10th, 1888, the Lavender Post Office was opened, and the community of Lavender was born. It brought mail to 150 residents scattered for 40 miles from the Upper Valley through Lavender, west to what is called Cedar, and farther west to the Lower Valley. Henry was postmaster, but I tended the post office along with me store. Henry also became justice of the peace, marrying people and handling some law matters. Now, horse racing was common entertainment in our valley. We even had a clearing near the Nash cabin called the racetrack. But one short-legged, powerful-built cow pony named a Swayback Johnny that belonged to Jim Nash was the fastest horse anyone in these parts ever seen. Most of the cowboys had lost money to Jim finding out how fast he was. Over in the Paradox Valley, there was a racehorse named a Sagebrush Jack, with a reputation of winning races all over Nevada. Well, a race between the two was set up. The Nashes put up 300 head of 3-year-old steers matched in cash by Netherly, the owner of Sagebrush Jack. Disappointment was mostly deserted, as men, women, and children went by wagon and horseback to Bedrock, where the race was held. We all camped in the cottonwoods along the river, and it was quite a doings. Billy Souther even brought a batch of his whiskey. Now, I love a doings, and a little whiskey is good for my asthma, even though Henry don't approve. The betting was heavy, and cowboys, always short of cash, bet their horses, saddles, and anything of value they carried. The Disappointment bunch was solidly behind the Nash horse. On the day of the race, there were a bunch of false starts by Sagebrush Jack, and the race was even put off to build a blind to hide the starting line for him. Now, Sagebrush had a professional jockey, and those antics were likely meant to unnerve the 14-year-old Disappointment lad riding Swayback Johnny, and it did. And that, and the fact that the track was a little longer than Swayback's best distance, led to his defeat by half a length. The Disappointment bunch returned home with cowboys itching rides and settlers' wagons. But we kept our faith in the Nash horse, and most of us recognized the underhanded business that most likely cost us that race. A rematch was already set up, and it was Nash's turn to set the time and place. Jim set the time for 2 months later, time enough for word to spread and interest to build. He set the place as Montrose, with a shorter track, lined with mounds of hay. Again, the Nashes put up 300 steers, and Netherly equal cash. I had a special fondness for Jim Nash, and I thought it was time to get even for those shenanigans in Bedrock, so I used me stash of gold coins to bankroll the Disappointment folks. I charged a lender's fee and took settlers' notes on cattle and other livestock. The cowboys pledged to work off the unpaid debt. I took special care that no one saw where the tobacco can was hid. I made 'em leave and come back to get the money. Again, the Disappointment bunch went to the race, and we all bet on Swayback Johnny. Since Sagebrush Jack had become the favorite, we had plenty of takers for our wagers and at good odds. Jim again allowed a starting blind to be built for the benefit of Sagebrush. When he burst from behind that blind and saw the mounds of hay along that track, his jockey couldn't even keep him on the track. Swayback's work on the range made him ignore all kinds of distractions, and he won a clear victory. Some of Sagebrush Jack's backers were a mite riled, but Netherly knew it was even and didn't squawk. And that's how I became the banker of Disappointment. Indian attack was our biggest worry. One day, I was out on horseback with Edith, tracking down a strayed milk cow, when we come upon a party of Utes with rifles, and they drew down on us. I reined to a halt, sure me end was near, and Edith would likely be taken. But an old Ute woman run out from the rest, and stood in front of my horse, and held up her blanket to hide us from their view. I whirled me horse and raced off with Edith. Edith and me owe our lives to that old Ute woman. I reckon she must have been to Grandma, too. The cattle business prospered in the valley, and Dolores County decided they wanted a share of that revenue. In 1885, they put ed tax on our cattle. They made assessments on 16 ranchers, including Henry. The assessor had trouble believing a woman could own cattle. I was the first in disappointment, but not the last. Well, of course, we weren't too happy about being taxed like that. So sometimes when the assessor came around, we weren't sure just how many cattle we had. One time, the assessor come to our place and asked me how many head we had. 18, I answered. He said, Mrs. Knight, are you certain 18 head is correct? I snapped back, no, by God, one of them might have died. The tax on our cattle moved Henry to get up a campaign to get Disappointment a voice in county government. In 1886, Disappointment cattleman Jim Lavender was the first from the valley elected to the Dolores County Board of Commissioners. In 1890, the Rio Grande Southern Railroad was put through from Ridgeway over Dallas Divide to Placerville. That line allowed us to ship our cattle to markets as far as Denver, Dodge, and Kansas City. We trailed the cattle up the Lone Cone Trail, onto the Beef Trail, skirting Lone Cone and following Specie Creek to the San Miguel River at Placerville. Later, Muriel Marshall, in the book Uncompahgre, claimed that Placerville became the largest cattle shipping point in the world. I reckon a lot of them come out of Disappointment Valley. Now, cattle men, but not cattle women, accompanied their cattle to market. They'd bed down on the train wherever they could put down a bedroll. At market, it was fancy hotels and high living. But no women were allowed, not even a cattle woman like me. Well, on Thursday's 19th birthday, she met that bloody snake, Newt Moreland, and he soon became the man in her life. Newt was a conductor on the D&RGW Railroad and worked the Durango to Silverton run most of the time. He also had cattle and a cow camp on South Mountain. Thursday would come to stay with her friend Ollie Lavender in the valley, and Newt got well known around here. He had a reputation as being as mean as they come, and after what I saw, I think he could hold a candle to the devil. He come riding up one day holding a gunny sack. I says, what you got in the sack, Newt? None of your business, old woman, he says. Leave it be. Then he dropped the sack and rode off. Well, of course, I had to take a peek. So I picked up the sack, and the head of an Indian rolled out. After that, I had no use for Newt Moreland. I was glad when Thursday stayed on at Disappointment when Newt's railroad job took him on the Pueblo run. I staked her to a start in the cattle business, and she took to working cattle right quick. She also spent more time with Edith, and they got close, like sisters. Thursday went on to marry Newt, though, and had 4 children with him. The first 2 was born in the valley, but then they moved up close to Norwood. He continued to work for the railroad, so he weren't at home much. His daughter Myrtle said Papa was mean. Us kids would hide when he came home. Edith grew up a lady, thanks to Henry. He taught her manners and morals, as well as reading, writing, and arithmetic. She was forbidden to curse like me, but we taught her to work hard and use her head. She was quiet, loved nature, and wrote poems about it. She also loved music, and she had a good voice. She would often sing for small gatherings. She'd only been out of the valley a few times, mostly to visit Thursday at Norwood. A local cowboy named Sam Bankston, whose family settled here in '79, took a shine to her, and her to him. Sam was outgoing and likable, but a bit wild. He also wrote verse. Here's one of them. Standing on the streets of Telluride, drunker than a son of a gun. When 2 moons rose over Placerville, when there ought to been just one. Henry and me had a high regard for Sam's father, John Q. Bankston, and we thought marriage would settle Sam down, so we encouraged the union. When Edith was 15 and Sam almost 23, they were married in Norwood and settled near his father's place in Upper Disappointment. They had 5 children, and one of their great-grandsons, Clifton, is the only descendant of the original settlers to still live and ranch in Disappointment Valley. When Adam was 18, he come to stay with us and learn cattle. For a while he helped Thursday with her cattle. Then he got his own homestead just north of our place and married a young woman named Emma. Emma had been raised by Bill and his third wife in Hermosa. That wife died, and after a short fourth marriage, old Bill come to live with Adam and Emma. Bill wasn't well, and Emma took good care of him. I even helped out some, taking care of Bill at the end of his life. I always helped out neighbors if I could. I especially cared about the young'uns. When Jim and Ollie Lavender's 5-year-old son Leonard fell on the ice and busted his hip real bad, I lent him the money to take him to Milwaukee to see a special doctor. Another family, Leon and Rose Eggers, lived just to the west of us. Rose died shortly after giving birth to her 6th child, leaving Leon to care for the children. At first, folks helped out and he managed. Later, Leon became a county commissioner and often left the children alone while he was in Rico. I worried about him, and I let him know I thought he weren't taking proper care of him. He didn't like me speaking my mind on it, and we got on the outs. The summer of 1900, while he and the children were in Dunton, his cabins burned down, and he accused me of starting the fire. I was charged and had to go to Rico, but the charge was dropped for lack of evidence. Eggers didn't return to the valley, and I think that was best for those children. By the fall of 1913, I was 71, and my health was poor. Henry had been elected county commissioner and had to be in Rico often, so he hired Stella Doss to take care of the store and post office. I had to take to me bed, and Edith wrote back and forth from her and Sam's place to tend to me. In the early spring, I could tell me time to pass was near. So one evening, I called Edith to my side and started to tell her where the tobacco can with the gold coins was hid. But before I could, Henry came in, so I stopped. I wanted Edith to have that money. That night, I passed on, and the location of the can remained a secret. I was buried in the Lavender Cemetery near Bill Imbling on March 26, 1914. In May of that year, Adam, age 46, became ill and died in Rico, where he and Emma had moved a few years before. Stella Doss moved away, and my store in the Lavender Post Office closed on February 17, 1915. At the end of 1916, Henry remarried, and before returning to the night place, he and Minnie took a honeymoon trip to the West Coast, causing Sam Bankston to reckon Henry must have found Lizzie's gold. Maybe he did, and maybe he didn't. Any questions? Or
now, which path did it take to get from Hermosa to Rico?
That is a good question. I am not sure, and I want to find out, and I intend to find out, but I don't know exactly how they came over. So if you find out, let me know.
You mentioned Cliff Bankston.
Mm-hmm.
And who is he to you?
My brother.
He's your brother.
Mm-hmm.
And his place is right at the mouth of Ryman Creek.
Well, it's up about a mile and a half. Up. It's up the Disappointment Road. Yes. He's half a mile. I've got the night place. I don't know if this makes sense to everybody, but I have the night place, and he has what was part of that at one point, up about half a mile from me.
I know his place.
Okay. Yeah. Yes?
Where is the Dolores-San Miguel County line across there, across Disappointment? I always thought that was San Miguel County down there.
No. When you're coming up the Norwood Road, you come up quite a ways, actually, before you cross into. Now, when you're going west, down the valley, you also cross back into San Miguel County, down at the west end of the valley. Yeah. And that valley drops 4,000 feet in that 40 miles. So the you know, it is very different. The terrain is very different at the top than it is.
Have you performed in Cortez?
Not yet.
Do you intend to? Do you have anything lined up?
I don't have anything lined up.
This is your second presentation.
This is my second presentation. This the way this all came. And I have to thank George. A couple of years ago, he was looking for one. My mother wrote the book Where Eagles Winter, and I have to really thank her because all of this information she got, and it's in her book. I just pulled it all together and gave Lizzy words. But George was looking for a book, and we're trying to get them reprinted. We only have a few left, and he had lost his. So my sister-in-law actually put him in touch with me, and he found out that I had Lizzy's cabin on my property, and he got interested in helping me look at maybe we could restore that, and here we are. And we are working on, we went to the state conference yesterday. We were presented at the state conference yesterday to see if we get designated as one of Colorado's most endangered places. So we're hoping that we do, and we haven't heard. You ought to check your email.
You spend your life in disappointment?
No, it was always home base. My dad did ranch some, and then he worked in the uranium mining, and you know, down at the far west end was the uranium district, and he worked in that, and then we moved around quite a bit, but our circles didn't get too far, and the ranch was always kind of the center. But I did go to a couple of one-room schools over there. My mother taught over there. My grandmother taught over there. So, anyway. Well, I have to tell you that I am having so much fun with this project. And I'm sorry?
So I say it's a good story. It's actually great history.
It is.
Somebody put it there.
Right. And I hope to do more. Yes.
I've read somewhere or heard somewhere that Rico was considered for being the capital of Colorado at one point. Have you ever heard that, or do you know if there's any truth to that?
No, I just now heard it. I think that was a good idea. I do not know that.
But it was a pretty big boom town in its
Yes,
day, correct?
yes, it was. It was a pretty important place. I mean, to do what they had to do to get the train over there, it had to be a pretty important place. All the trestles and everything they had to build to do that. Yes.
Do you have any family stories of Odo Mears and sending the railroad over around the long way rather than over Red Mountain initially?
I don't have. My stories pretty much center around the valley and the people, you know, in the surrounding communities because, you know, they went. I mean, they spent a lot of time in Telluride, and Sam Bankston certainly did, in different places. But those are the ones that I really know. Yeah. Yes.
Do you know how the town of Lavender got its name?
My grandmother's family. Okay, the Nashes. I'm six generations on my grandfather's side, back to Lizzy, and on my grandmother's side, back through the Lavenders and the Nashes. And that's how it got. And I just think, because the Lavender School, the Lavender Post Office, I just think they liked that name. Yeah. Yes.
How many people still live at this Pleasant Valley?
My brother is the only year-round resident. from 150 when Lavender Post Office opened to 1 year round. Now, my other brother and I both have our own little places there, and we go there, but we aren't there year round.
Are soufflets still out there?
Oh, that's a good question. You know what? I don't know if they are year round. Are they year round still? Okay, so maybe there's one more. And they're down on the West End. And I kind of forget about the West End. And that's not fair, is it? That is not fair to do that. But yes, they are there, and thank you. Yes.
Is there a cemetery associated with Lavender? Or
Two.
family?
There are two cemeteries, and there is a certified and marked, and the woman responsible for that, getting that those cemeteries restored and marked and everything, is here in the audience. Luann Grover. There are two of them. There's the Lavender Cemetery and the Nash Cemetery, the Nash Cemetery, and there are two Civil War veterans, one buried in each one. Yeah. Wilkes Nash, the first settler, Wilkes and Marianne Nash. Wilkes was a Civil War veteran. Yes.
How do you get to Lavender? I have no clue where it is.
Well, go like you're going to Norwood, okay? And then you're going to turn south, and you know, what is that road? At Miramonte Road, yeah. And you just keep going. And you'll drop down off a very long, steep hill.
Not marked as Lavender anywhere.
No, it is not.
Road sign will tell you
No.
how to get there.
And it doesn't, there are no post offices anymore. In fact, the mail came out of Norwood, came out of Rico for a long time. Then they got it coming out of Norwood, and that was until just a few years ago. In fact, when I found out that my address was Redvale, I went, what? When did that happen? So it comes out of twice a week. Get mail.
There's a county maintenance shop.
Yes.
right?
Yes, right there, there's a Y in the road. The road kind of Ys there. And if you go west on that road, if you're coming down from the Norwood side, and you make a right-hand kind of Y to the right, and you pass the Lavender Schoolhouse just around the corner there that the Grovers own and have as a summer place and take very good care of. You are in the valley, and you're just above what would be called Lavender, but it's not thought of that way anymore. It hasn't been for a long time.
But I tell my grandkids when I take them out there, and I've had just about all I can stand of them in the house. I send them out to look for Lizzie's cans. We're not really in the same location, but they all need to RJ.
Well, yeah.
Well, one day they'll find it and then laugh.
Yes.
Do the wild horses still go up in the upper disappointment?
Well, they're on a preserve now, and I guess you've been reading about that in the papers lately. Yeah, we got a little bit of typical disappointment publicity with that story. They're on a preserve, and they're down about where Cedar is,
And
down
they're fenced, so
west.
they can't go
Yeah,
in
they're
the upper
fenced.
disappointment anymore.
Yeah, they're fenced, but on the BLM. Yes.
They're on the north side of that road.
Yeah. Now they go.
They have a pretty big range in there.
And
It really comes almost up to your place.
yeah, almost. And it's the west end of North Mountain, so they get up in some nice area too. Yeah.
So for all the fear of the youth, it sounded like the only travesty was a youth rather than any of the things.
I'm sorry, I don't think I heard that.
So there was, you said in the story, you said that the fear was of the youth, but the end, were there any settlers that were harmed by the Ute? Because it sounded like the Ute were the only casualties.
There were not in the valley, but in around Cortez, west of Cortez, there had been some homesteads burned and some people killed, and those stories would make it to them, and they would be pretty frightened. And of course, that was a hunting, a Ute hunting area, and so it was, yes.
And where were the stills?
That along with Lizzie's, well, they were there. They were definitely there. You know, and I don't know exactly because, you know, that was, I know my I can tell you a little story. You want to hear a little story? Well, my grandfather and his brother kept telling her they were going to build her a new chicken coop, and they were out cutting posts to use to build this chicken coop, and they kept going and to cut these posts and going and cut these posts, but she wasn't seeing the posts. One day she followed him. And was it a hatchet or what did she have with her? A shovel? I don't know, but whatever it was, she took it to the still. It didn't survive that trip.
So she was a temperance lady.
Yeah.
Well, the word used to be that all along this point of the creek there were several locations.
Yes, yes. During Prohibition, well, you know, the saloons up here in Telluride had to get their stuff somewhere. Well, I really appreciate you all coming out this evening. It's been a real pleasure to have such a great audience and to tell this story again. Because I like you said, I think it's very important that we know what these people's lives were like. You know, not just the dates and major events, but what their lives were like.
And even comparing to the things that what we now surviving all this difficult time.
Mm-hmm.
And people say job, job, job. These people coming without no security. It means your grandmother was really good and she was always thinking how I have to survive. And we lose this skill. Actually, you know, we expect it's good. I mean, social things is good, and we have
Right.
to share wealth.
Right.
Otherwise, we're not worthy to be as a wealthy country. But people lose this ability because if you feed them with a golden spoon, and actually in America everybody have golden spoon because they always have food. I come from Russia, so I know the difference. And but they're losing their ability. These people was. You know, the man was maybe a little lazy, but she pushed him to do it, and she started to do it. Very interesting. It's completely different.
Yes, yeah.
They
You're
start
right.
from an empty place, actually. Only Indians was there, so it wasn't industry, and it wasn't big city. It wasn't, you know, they start from the dirt.
Right.
You know, so many of us never know. I was born in Russia. It's great country, many good things, but we was in a great country, which everything was built in 42 after war and everything. We survived, but here start from nothing, and they survive and prosper, and they have, you know, generation coming. It's very interesting.
I agree, and I'm really hoping that this cabin can be restored. In fact, I would like to see, because their outbuildings are not as in good a condition. I don't know if any of you saw some of the slides that were shown while we were getting started. A lot of those are of Lizzie's cabin. Well, I have to include Henry because he also, you know, he built that cabin, and he was over there actually before she got over there. But that's pretty much intact. And then the outbuildings are falling down, but they're there. And I would really like to see them all restored and put together basically kind of as it was. And one of the things that the state asked is, how will you make this available to the public? And I would like it to be somewhat of a living history experience kind of place. So that's my hope. And
It's a great opportunity. It's the homestead. One of the pictures shows what we think was the horse barn, and below the horse barn, where Disappointment Creek is cut into the bank, down about that far into the ground is a layer about that thick of horse manure. And so that was where they kept their horses for sure. Then there's another building that's definitely a chicken house, and I think that ruin that's right out in front between your cabin, between your house and Lizzy's cabin, might be, when we start digging in there, I think we will find that that's a little blacksmith shop.
it very well may be.
So
Yeah.
it was all on the other side of the creek. The road's on the north side, and so a good deal of the year you can't get across the creek to the cabin, and I think that's how it got saved. Nobody could get in there to haul stuff away, so it just sat there for close to 100 years.
Do you need letters of support or something to get them to grant you the funds to do it?
Well, our goal is if we can get designation by the state as an endangered place, then we can get assistance from other parts of the State Historical Society to do a good documentation and a good preservation plan, and we'd like to do an archaeological study of the place and really document everything that's there.
At some point we will. Some point we will need, and so we'll be letting people know. Right at like I said, we're at this point right now where they have to make this decision. We did have some people, we had to get some things together, and your Historical Society for San Miguel County wrote a letter for us. Mrs. Grover wrote a letter for us. Rico wrote a letter for us. And a few other. My problem in doing this is the state isn't used to dealing with just an individual and someplace that doesn't have an organization behind it. Well, there's nobody over there to organize.
Very small town. And really the disappointment is that Dolores County, the county seat now is in Dove Creek, and they're interested in beans, and they barely remember that they've got a big part of the county outside.
So so we're hoping that this will happen, and then we'll go from there. And I hope, my plan is, there are so many amazing stories of amazing people from there, and I intend to write some more.
I'm heading for the last round of